Effective immediately, your position is being eliminated due to restructuring. Sign this by Friday or you get nothing." Brian Kessler slid the severance contract across his mahogany desk like he was dealing cards. I sat there, staring at the document that would end 31 years of my life at Norcross Systems, Inc., 27 days. That was all that stood between me and my full pension, and this 39-year-old CFO knew it. My name is Teresa Langford, and I am 59 years old. For over 3 decades, I have served as Director of Compliance at Norcross Systems, a logistics software company here in Denver, Colorado. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of college when the company had 12 employees and operated out of a converted warehouse. I watched it grow into a 200-person operation with offices across 3 states. I survived 4 mergers, 6 CEOs, and countless rounds of strategic realignments. Through it all, I maintained our regulatory standards, kept us out of legal trouble, and earned the respect of everyone who mattered. Everyone except Brian Kessler. He had been promoted to CFO just 8 months ago, brought in from some consulting firm to optimize operational efficiency. From day one, he made it clear he viewed compliance as a necessary evil rather than a business safeguard. During budget meetings, he would roll his eyes whenever I requested resources for regulatory updates. He questioned every expenditure, every training session, every consultant fee that kept us ahead of industry changes. "This is purely a business decision," Brian continued, adjusting his designer tie. "Nothing personal. The board needs to see immediate cost reductions, and frankly, compliance can be handled by our legal department going forward." I nodded calmly, though my heart was pounding. "I understand." "Good. I appreciate your professionalism about this." He seemed relieved that I wasn't fighting back. "The severance package is quite generous considering the circumstances. 12 weeks of pay plus your accrued vacation time. 12 weeks versus the full pension I had earned through 31 years of dedicated service." The mathematics were insulting, but I kept my expression neutral. Something felt wrong about this timing. Too convenient. Too calculated. In all my years at Norcross, I had never seen anyone terminated this close to pension eligibility. Company policy explicitly protected employees within 30 days of vesting, yet here I sat, with a termination letter dated exactly 27 days before my milestone. "I will review this carefully," I said, placing the contract in my briefcase. "Remember, Friday is the deadline. After that, the offer expires completely." As I walked out of his office, I caught my reflection in the lobby's glass doors. I looked like any other woman approaching retirement. Gray hair, neatly styled, conservative business suit, sensible shoes. What Brian didn't see was the fire burning behind my calm exterior, or the network I had built over 3 decades in this industry. I returned to my office on the 14th floor, the same corner space I had occupied for the past 8 years. The walls were lined with regulatory certificates, industry awards, and photographs spanning my career at Norcross. There was the picture from our first major software deployment in 2003, another from the company's 20th anniversary celebration, and dozens more chronicling the evolution of both the company and my role within it. My assistant, Patricia, knocked softly on the doorframe. "Teresa, I heard rumors. Is everything okay?" "I am clearing out my office," I said simply. "My position has been eliminated." Her face went pale. "But you're so close to retirement. Can they do that?" "Apparently they can." I began removing personal items from my desk drawers, each one a small piece of my professional life. The stress ball from our 2015 audit marathon. The coffee mug Ruth Delgado had given me when she retired 6 months ago. A framed photo of my late husband David, taken during our anniversary trip to Yellowstone. Patricia lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to help. She had worked with me for 4 years and understood better than most how integral I was to Norcross's operations. I handled everything from FDA compliance for our medical logistics clients to transportation regulations for our freight management systems. My departure would leave a massive knowledge gap that couldn't simply be absorbed by the legal department, Teresa, this doesn't make sense, Patricia whispered. The Morrison audit is next month. The DOT certification renewal is due in 6 weeks. How can they possibly? They will figure it out, I interrupted gently. They always do. But even as I said it, I knew Patricia was right. Brian Kessler had no idea what my department actually did. He saw compliance as paperwork and bureaucracy, not as the complex web of relationships and expertise that kept Norcross functioning legally across multiple jurisdictions. I had spent years building connections with regulatory agencies, understanding the nuances of ever-changing requirements, and developing internal processes that made compliance seamless for our operational teams. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I had prevented a potential lawsuit that could have cost the company millions when I caught a software glitch that was incorrectly calculating freight classifications. 6 months before that, I had negotiated with state regulators to avoid penalties when our Jacksonville office accidentally processed shipments using outdated hazmat protocols. These weren't just administrative tasks. They were business-critical interventions that protected Norcross's reputation and bottom line. As I packed my final box, I thought about Ruth Delgado's retirement party 6 months ago. She had pulled me aside that evening and said something that seemed casual at the time, but now felt prophetic. Watch out for the young ones who think experience is expensive rather than valuable. The box containing 31 years of my professional life fit easily in the trunk of my Honda Accord. As I drove through downtown Denver toward my home in Lakewood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was happening at Norcross. Brian's termination speech had been too polished, too rehearsed. The severance contract had been prepared in advance, with specific clauses that seemed designed to prevent me from seeking legal recourse. I had seen enough corporate maneuvering over the years to recognize a setup when I encountered one. The timing was suspicious. The explanation was weak. And most telling of all, Brian had seemed nervous despite his confident performance. He kept checking his watch and glancing at his computer screen as if he was following a predetermined script. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. The caller ID showed Patricia's number. Teresa, I had to call you. After you left, Brian came down to your office with 2 people I didn't recognize. They spent an hour going through your files and computer. When I asked what they were doing, Brian said they were securing sensitive materials for the transition. Did they take anything? They loaded everything into boxes, all your physical files, your computer, even your desk calendar. And Teresa, there's something else. I overheard Brian on a call afterward. He was talking to someone about Phase 2 and mentioned that the legal department needs to be insulated from liability. What does that mean? I sat in my car for a moment, processing this information. Patricia, I need you to be very careful about what you say and do at work. Don't ask questions about my termination, and don't discuss this conversation with anyone. Are you going to fight this? I am going to explore my options. After hanging up, I remained in my driveway for several minutes, staring at my modest 2-bedroom house. David and I had purchased it in 1995, planning to pay it off before retirement. We had succeeded, thanks to careful budgeting and my steady income at Norcross. The pension I was now being denied would have allowed me to maintain my lifestyle, travel, and maybe even spoil the grandchildren I hope to have someday. Instead, I was facing an uncertain financial future with only a minimal severance package to bridge the gap until I could find new employment. At 59, starting over in a new company would be challenging, especially in a field where younger candidates often seemed preferred, despite lacking the depth of experience I possessed. But as I finally got out of the car and walked toward my front door, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about quarterly compliance reports or regulatory deadlines. I wasn't concerned about managing Brian's unrealistic expectations or justifying my department's value to people who fundamentally misunderstood its importance. I was free to focus entirely on one thing, ensuring that Brian Kessler's calculated cruelty would cost him far more than he had ever imagined. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the severance contract spread before me, studying every clause and provision with the same attention to detail I had applied to regulatory documents for 3 decades. The more I read, the more convinced I became that this termination was part of a larger strategy. The contract included unusually restrictive non-disclosure agreements, broad non-compete clauses, and language that would prevent me from discussing my departure with current or former Norcross employees. Most troubling was a section requiring me to acknowledge that my termination was performance-based, rather than part of a reduction in force. This was clearly false. My last performance review had been exemplary, and I had never received any disciplinary actions or warnings about my work quality. The contract was designed to protect Norcross from wrongful termination claims, while painting my departure as justified. I decided to call Ruth Delgado. Ruth had been my mentor and closest friend at Norcross for over 15 years before retiring as HR director 6 months ago. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it would be her. Teresa, how wonderful to hear from you. How are things at the office? Ruth's voice was warm and familiar, a comforting reminder of better times at Norcross. Actually, Ruth, I was terminated today. Brian Kessler eliminated my position, 27 days before my pension vests. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Ruth finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. 27 days? Teresa, that's not a coincidence, that's deliberate. What do you mean? I mean, I've seen this exact scenario before, at my previous company before I joined Norcross. It's called pension dumping, deliberately terminating employees just before they qualify for full benefits. It saved my old company millions in pension obligations until we took them to court. Ruth's revelation hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying this was planned? I'm saying the timing is too convenient to ignore. Think about it, Teresa. You're one of the most expensive employees on their books in terms of future pension liability. Your 31 years of service translates to a significant monthly payment for the rest of your life. From an actuarial standpoint, preventing your pension from vesting could save them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I felt my anger building as the implications became clear. But surely there are laws against this kind of thing. There are, but they're complex, and companies think they can get away with it if they structure the termination carefully. The fact that they're calling it a departmental consolidation rather than a layoff is part of the strategy. It makes it harder to prove age discrimination or pension manipulation. Ruth, I need to ask you something. Do you still have access to any of your old HR files from Norcross? I shouldn't, but... She paused. When I retired, I kept copies of certain documents for my own protection. Employment contracts, policy changes, executive communications. Things that might be relevant if anyone ever questioned decisions I had made during my tenure. Would any of those documents be relevant to my situation? Possibly. Teresa, why don't you come over tomorrow? We should go through everything together. And I think you should know, I heard rumors before I retired about changes to the pension plan that were being discussed at the executive level. I never got details, but Brian Kessler was heavily involved in those conversations. After hanging up with Ruth, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my back porch, looking out at the mountains in the distance. For 31 years, I had given Norcross Systems my best effort, my loyalty, and a significant portion of my life. I had worked late nights and weekends, missed family gatherings for urgent compliance issues, and consistently put the company's interests ahead of my own convenience. Tomorrow, I would begin to discover just how little that loyalty had meant to them. Ruth lived in a well-maintained ranch house in Westminster, about 20 minutes from my own home. When I arrived the next morning, she greeted me at the door with coffee and a grim expression that told me she had spent the night thinking about my situation. I've been going through my files, she said, leading me to her home office. Teresa, what I found is worse than I initially thought. Her desk was covered with manila folders, printouts of emails, and handwritten notes. Ruth had always been meticulous about documentation, a trait that had served her well during her HR career, and was about to serve me even better. "This email is from February," she said, handing me a printed message. "It's from Brian Kessler to the executive team, discussing pension liability optimization. Look at this paragraph." I read aloud, "Our analysis indicates that preventing certain high-tenure employees from reaching full vesting could significantly improve our quarterly projections. Legal recommends structuring any necessary workforce adjustments as performance-based terminations or departmental consolidations to minimize exposure." My hands were shaking as I continued reading. The email specifically mentioned identifying employees within 60 days of pension vesting and developing appropriate transition strategies for their positions. While it didn't mention me by name, the timing and criteria made it clear that I had been targeted months ago. "Ruth, this is evidence of conspiracy. How did you get this?" Executive emails were automatically copied to HR for documentation purposes. It was company policy to ensure we had records of all employment-related decisions. When I retired, I kept copies of sensitive communications that might be relevant to future legal issues. I never thought I'd need them this soon. She handed me another document, a spreadsheet showing all Norcross employees within 90 days of pension vesting. My name was highlighted in yellow, along with 3 others: James Morrison from IT, Sandra Williams from Sales, and Robert Chen from Operations. Next to each name were notes about potential restructuring opportunities. "Teresa, you weren't the only target. They're planning to eliminate anyone who's about to become expensive in terms of pension obligations." I felt sick. This wasn't just about me. It was a systematic plan to cheat long-term employees out of their earned benefits. "Have any of the others been terminated yet?" "Not yet, but according to this timeline, James Morrison is scheduled for next month, Sandra Williams in 6 weeks. They're spacing out the terminations to make them look unrelated." Ruth pulled out another folder, this one containing internal memos about the compliance department specifically. "These show that Brian has been building a case against your department for months. He's been documenting every minor expense, questioning every consultant fee, and creating a paper trail to justify eliminating the position. But the department is essential. We prevent legal issues that could cost millions." "That's not how Brian sees it. Look at this memo from him to the CEO." She handed me a document titled Operational Efficiency Analysis, Compliance Department. The memo argued that compliance functions could be streamlined by transferring responsibilities to the legal department, resulting in immediate cost savings of over $200,000 annually. What the memo failed to mention was that the legal department had no expertise in regulatory compliance, no relationships with regulatory agencies, and no understanding of the day-to-day operational requirements that kept Norcross in good standing with various government bodies. "Ruth, they're going to face massive problems without proper compliance oversight." "Probably, but that's not Brian's concern. He's focused on showing quick cost reductions to impress the board. If compliance issues arise later, he'll blame poor documentation or transitional challenges." As I studied the documents spread across Ruth's desk, I realized that my termination was just the beginning of a much larger problem at Norcross. Brian Kessler wasn't just stealing my pension. He was systematically dismantling the institutional knowledge and experience that had made the company successful for over 3 decades. Ruth made fresh coffee while I continued reviewing the documents. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Brian Kessler's strategy, but also revealed something more personal and infuriating. He had been planning my termination since the day he was hired. "Look at this," Ruth said, returning with 2 steaming mugs. She placed another email in front of me, dated from Brian's 2nd week at Norcross. He was asking about pension liabilities before he even learned how our compliance systems worked. The email was addressed to the company's benefits administrator and included detailed questions about pension vesting schedules, early retirement options, and the financial impact of employee separations on the pension fund. He had specifically requested a list of all employees approaching full vesting, their projected pension costs, and any legal precedents for employment changes affecting pension eligibility. "This proves premeditation," I said. "He wasn't eliminating my position because of budget concerns. He was looking for ways to avoid paying my pension from the moment he arrived." There's more. Ruth opened another folder. Remember that presentation Brian gave to the board in June about right-sizing operational expenses? I attended that meeting as HR director. Here are my notes. Her handwritten notes were detailed and damning. Brian had presented a 5-year plan that included strategic workforce optimization, targeting employees with the highest benefit costs. He had used charts and graphs to show how eliminating legacy personnel could improve profit margins by up to 12% annually. When board members had raised concerns about losing experienced employees, Brian had dismissed their objections by arguing that institutional knowledge was less valuable than operational agility in a rapidly changing technology sector. He claimed that younger employees with current skills could handle traditional responsibilities more efficiently. The board approved his plan, Ruth said quietly. I voiced my concerns about age discrimination and the risk of losing critical expertise, but I was overruled. 3 weeks later, they announced my early retirement package. This revelation stunned me. Ruth, are you saying they forced you out too? Not exactly forced, but strongly encouraged. They offered me a very generous early retirement package and made it clear that my traditional approach to human resources wasn't aligned with their new vision. I was tired of fighting corporate politics, so I took the deal and left. I realized that Ruth's departure 6 months ago had been part of the same strategy that was now targeting me. By removing the experienced HR director, who might object to questionable employment practices, Brian had cleared the way for implementing his pension dumping scheme without internal resistance. Ruth, we have to stop this. Not just for me, but for James, Sandra, and Robert. And for any other employees who might be targeted in the future. I agree completely. But Teresa, we need to be smart about this. Brian has the legal department on his side, and he's been careful to document everything in ways that protect the company from obvious discrimination claims. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. We need to build an airtight case that shows pattern and intent. The emails about pension liability optimization are good, but we need more. We need to demonstrate that your termination was pretextual, that the compliance department elimination was manufactured to justify getting rid of you specifically. How do we do that? We need documentation showing that your department was actually successful and necessary, that there were no performance issues with your work, and that the cost savings Brian claims are either exaggerated or will result in much higher costs down the road. I thought about my files and computer that Brian had seized the previous day. They took all my records, performance reviews, cost-benefit analyses, documentation of compliance successes, everything that would prove my value to the company. That might work in our favor, Ruth said with a slight smile. Taking your files could be seen as destroying evidence. And besides, I have copies of your performance reviews in my HR files. You've been rated exemplary for 8 consecutive years. Ruth and I spent the weekend organizing our evidence and developing our strategy. By Sunday evening, we had built a comprehensive case showing that my termination was part of a deliberate scheme to avoid pension obligations through age discrimination. We had Brian's emails about pension liability optimization, the spreadsheet targeting employees near vesting, documentation of the fake justifications for eliminating my department, and my exemplary performance reviews. On Monday morning, I called attorney David Richardson, whom Ruth had worked with during her previous company's pension dumping case. After reviewing our evidence, he agreed to take my case on a contingency basis. This is one of the clearest examples of pension manipulation I've seen, Richardson told us during our Tuesday meeting. The documentation is exceptional, and the pattern of targeting employees near vesting is obvious. We're going to file a formal complaint with the Department of Labor while simultaneously pursuing wrongful termination and age discrimination claims. That afternoon, Richardson filed our complaint, and by Wednesday morning, local news station Channel 7 was running a story titled, "Denver Software Company Accused of Pension Fraud." The reporter had obtained copies of our legal filing and was interviewing employment law experts about the broader implications of pension dumping schemes. By Thursday, the story had been picked up by the Denver Post and several industry publications. Norcross Systems was suddenly facing intense public scrutiny about their employment practices, and potential clients were asking questions about the company's ethical standards. Brian Kessler called me Friday morning, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Teresa, we need to talk. This situation has gotten completely out of hand." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Brian. The board wants to resolve this matter quietly. We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement." "I'll have my attorney contact you," I said, and hung up. The following Monday brought developments that exceeded even Ruth's optimistic expectations. Richardson called to inform me that the Department of Labor was launching a formal investigation into Norcross Systems' pension practices, and 3 additional employees had contacted his office, claiming they had been terminated under suspicious circumstances. "Teresa, this is becoming a class action case," Richardson explained. "We now have James Morrison, who was terminated last week, exactly 60 days before his pension vested. We have documentation of Sandra Williams being placed on a performance improvement plan despite stellar reviews, clearly setting up her termination. And we have a former IT director who was let go 2 years ago under circumstances that now look highly suspicious." Meanwhile, the media attention was intensifying. Channel 7 had interviewed pension law experts who explained how companies could save millions by systematically eliminating employees just before they qualified for full benefits. The story resonated with viewers because it represented a fundamental betrayal of the social contract between employers and loyal workers. Ruth called me Wednesday with news that made my day. "Teresa, I just heard from Patricia. Brian called an emergency meeting yesterday to announce that the compliance department is being reconstituted immediately. Apparently, 3 clients have raised concerns about regulatory oversight, and the Morrison audit next week has become a crisis because nobody understands your old procedures." "Are they offering me my job back?" "Not yet, but Patricia says Brian looked absolutely miserable during the meeting. The board has apparently been asking very pointed questions about why they eliminated such a critical function right before major compliance deadlines." By Thursday, Richardson received a call from Norcross's legal team requesting a settlement conference. The company was clearly feeling pressure from multiple directions: the federal investigation, negative media coverage, operational problems caused by my absence, and the prospect of additional lawsuits from other terminated employees. The tide was turning, and Brian Kessler was about to learn that stealing someone's pension after 31 years of service carried consequences he had never anticipated. As I looked toward the future, I realized that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply ensuring that the truth comes to light, and that my years of careful documentation and professional relationships had given me the tools to fight back when it mattered most. My journey to justice had taught me that loyalty and integrity, while not always immediately rewarded, ultimately provide the strongest foundation for both personal satisfaction and professional vindication.